Emily Carter had always enjoyed the feeling of boarding a plane. To her, airports were liminal spaces neither here nor there, suspended between destinations. She liked the quiet hum of anticipation, the organized chaos of people dragging suitcases, the mix of accents, the hurried footsteps of travelers trying not to miss their boarding group. For others, flying was a chore, a necessity to endure. For Emily, it was a pause from her hectic world, a time when she could slip away from her buzzing phone and pressing deadlines. That morning, she had arrived at the airport 2 hours early. Not because she was anxious, but because she liked having time to settle. She checked her bag, breezed through security, and found herself at the gate with a coffee in one hand and a half-finished book in the other. It was a routine flight from Dallas to Chicago, one she had taken many times before. Nothing about it suggested anything more than a few hours in the air and a safe landing on the other end. When the gate agent called her boarding group, Emily stood, smoothed her blazer, and stepped onto the jet bridge. The air smelled faintly metallic, a mix of recycled oxygen and jet fuel drifting from outside. As she entered the aircraft, a cheerful flight attendant greeted her with a practiced smile. "Welcome aboard." Emily returned the smile, nodding politely as she found her way to seat 22B, an aisle seat near the wing. She slid her bag under the seat in front of her, tucked her purse beside it, and sank into the cushion. It wasn't first class, but she had flown enough to know that an aisle seat was its own kind of luxury room to stretch her legs and a quick escape when she needed the restroom. Around her, the plane was alive with the usual choreography of boarding. A family of 4 argued, good-naturedly, over who would sit by the window. A businessman muttered into his Bluetooth headset, already juggling deals before the plane even left the ground. 2 college students laughed as they wrestled their backpacks into the overhead bins. Emily watched it all with quiet detachment, the way one might watch the opening act of a play before the real story began. Once settled, she pulled her book from her bag. It was a novel she had been meaning to finish, though truthfully, she rarely got more than a few chapters in on flights before dozing off. Planes had that effect on her, the low rumble of the engines, the steady movement through the air, the sense of being cocooned in a world apart from the one below. She placed her bookmark at the ready, and then, almost automatically, pulled the airline safety card from the seat pocket. She had seen it dozens of times before, the diagram of exits, the instructions for oxygen masks, the reminder that life vests were tucked beneath the seat. Most passengers ignored it entirely, treating the flight attendant's safety demonstration as background noise. Emily, however, always gave it a glance. Not because she expected disaster, but because a small part of her respected the gravity of flying a machine weighing hundreds of thousands of pounds, defying gravity, carrying lives across the sky. By the time the plane filled, the hum of voices grew louder. Bags thudded as they were stowed, seatbelts clicked, and phones were reluctantly switched into airplane mode. Emily noticed the man next to her, a retiree by the look of him, with thinning white hair and a crossword puzzle in his lap. He gave her a polite nod, but said nothing. She didn't mind. She wasn't in the mood for small talk. The intercom chimed, and the captain's voice carried over the speakers. "Good morning, folks. This is your captain speaking. We'll be departing in just a few minutes, heading north toward Chicago. Weather looks smooth most of the way, so sit back, relax, and enjoy the flight." A ripple of relief seemed to move through the passengers, as if the reassurance of a calm flight was all anyone needed to settle in. Emily smiled faintly. She slipped her headphones over her ears, cued a playlist of soft acoustic songs, and leaned back. The engines roared to life, sending a gentle vibration through the floor beneath her shoes. The plane pushed back from the gate, taxied slowly toward the runway, and then paused as if gathering its strength. Emily closed her eyes briefly, savoring the moment before takeoff, the suspenseful stillness before the rush. Then came the acceleration, pressing her into her seat as the ground blurred outside the window. With a mighty lift, the aircraft rose. Into the sky, the city shrinking beneath it. Once airborne, the cabin settled into a rhythm. The seatbelt sign pinged off, and passengers shifted, reclining, stretching, adjusting. A flight attendant rolled a cart down the aisle, offering drinks and snacks. Emily accepted a ginger ale, placing the cold can on her tray table. She took a sip, listening to the fizz. Around her, the retiree scribbled answers into his crossword. The students in the row behind her played a card game, and a child near the front giggled at something on a tablet. It was all so ordinary, so familiar, that Emily felt herself drift into a state of quiet contentment. She opened her book, read a few paragraphs, and then found her eyelids growing heavy. The words blurred, her focus waning. She slipped out her earbuds, tucked them into her lap, and rested her head against the seat. The rhythmic hum of the engines lulled her like a cradle. In seat 22B, she was just another traveler among many anonymous, unnoticed, perfectly safe. She thought of the meeting waiting for her in Chicago, of the colleagues she would shake hands with, of the presentation slides she had rehearsed in her hotel room. Life was unfolding on schedule, predictable and calm, yet in the subtle quiet of her drifting thoughts, Emily felt something stir. Not fear exactly, but an inexplicable sense of unease, the kind that whispers at the edges of the mind. She dismissed it quickly, probably nerves, or the exhaustion of travel. She adjusted her seatbelt, exhaled, and closed her eyes fully this time, letting the drowsiness take her. What she could not know, what none of the passengers could know, was that this ordinary flight, this stretch of calm skies and recycled air, would soon fracture into chaos. The intercom that now announced drink service would later call for something unthinkable. The book in her lap would go unread. The man with the crossword, the children giggling in row 18, the businessman tapping at his laptop, all of them would soon look to her. For now, though, Emily Carter was just a woman in seat 22B, resting on a routine flight. The storm that would change her life forever was still gathering unseen, somewhere ahead. The flight had settled into its usual mid-air rhythm, that peculiar calm where time seemed suspended. At 35,000 feet, the cabin was a floating community, strangers, temporarily bound together by destination, fate, and the shared hum of engines slicing through the sky. Emily stirred in her seat, her book still unopened on her lap. The ginger ale can had grown warm, condensation long since dried. She shifted, glanced down the aisle, and watched as the attendants maneuvered their service carts with practiced precision. A row ahead, a child was fidgeting, his mother producing an endless supply of crackers and juice boxes to keep him occupied. The businessman 2 rows back had reclined with his laptop open, face bathed in the cold glow of spreadsheets. It was, in every sense, an ordinary flight. And perhaps that was why the announcement, when it came, felt like a crack of thunder on a cloudless day. The intercom chimed. Conversations dimmed instinctively, passengers leaning back or glancing upward, ready to receive another routine update. Cruising altitude, estimated arrival, maybe a weather note. Instead, what followed was a voice trembling with something rare urgency. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain began. There was a pause, almost imperceptible, as though he were weighing his words. "If there is anyone on board who has training in flying an aircraft, please make yourself known to the crew immediately." Silence. At first, passengers blinked in confusion. Surely they had misheard. Emily sat upright, her pulse thudding. The businessman lowered his. laptop screen, brows furrowing. The child in the next row stopped chewing, his mother's hand frozen halfway to his mouth. The announcement hung in the air like smoke, impossible to ignore, yet difficult to grasp. An edge of disbelief rippled through the cabin. Whispers began, cautious at first, then swelling louder. What did he say? Did he say someone needs to fly the plane? That can't be real. That's not. Another chime silenced the murmurs. The captain's voice returned, firmer but strained. I repeat, if there is anyone on board with flying experience, please make yourself known to the crew. This is an urgent matter. This time there was no mistaking it. The words were deliberate, heavy with gravity. Emily's heart hammered against her ribs. She looked toward the front of the plane, as if expecting the captain himself to appear and explain. Instead, she saw a flight attendant hurrying down the aisle, her professional smile replaced by something raw concern. Passengers turned in their seats, scanning one another as if an answer might materialize among them. Some chuckled nervously, insisting it had to be a misunderstanding, maybe a test of the intercom system. But their laughter was brittle, quickly fading. Others shifted uncomfortably, clutching armrests, instinctively tightening seatbelts. Emily's mind spun. She had always been fascinated by flying, which was why years ago she had taken lessons at a small airfield outside her hometown. She had logged hours in a Cessna, even practiced landings on short rural runways. But life had intervened, work, family, responsibility. She had stopped before earning her license. Those memories, long dormant, surfaced now with unnerving clarity. The feel of the yoke beneath her hands, the checklist recited before takeoff, the weight of concentration when aligning with the runway. But this was no Cessna. This was a passenger jet. Her breath quickened, palms damp. She pressed them against her knees to steady herself. The passengers' murmurs thickened into a low buzz of panic. A young woman across the aisle muttered prayers. Under her breath, the retiree beside Emily adjusted his glasses, shaking his head in disbelief. This can't be good, he whispered, though no one had asked. Moments later, the lead flight attendant reappeared, her composure visibly strained. She leaned toward a man in row 10, who had raised his hand hesitantly, only to shake his head moments later. I've played flight simulators, he stammered, but I don't think... She moved on quickly. Emily's chest tightened. The unspoken truth hung between every passenger. If no one stepped forward, the outcome was unthinkable. The intercom crackled again, softer this time, almost personal. Folks, this is your captain. My co-pilot has suffered a medical emergency. He's currently unresponsive. I cannot do this alone. If you have any flying experience, Plasnow is the time. Gasps spread down the rows like dominoes. Some passengers covered their mouths. A man cursed quietly. The air, once filled with the simple drone of engines, was now electric with fear. Emily's gaze drifted to the seat pocket in front of her, the safety card still tucked neatly inside. She thought of the diagrams she had studied earlier, how trivial they seemed compared to this moment. The card offered neat, printed instructions. How to fasten a seatbelt, how to find the nearest exit. But there was nothing for this. Nothing for when the person flying the plane could no longer fly. Her training whispered back to her, like an echo from another life. You know the basics. You know more than anyone else here. But can you do it? Can you handle this? She looked around. Faces blurred together, wide-eyed, pale, desperate. Every glance seemed to ask the same unspoken question. Who among us will step forward? Who will save us? Emily's throat tightened. She wanted to shrink into her seat, to disappear into anonymity. She was an ordinary passenger, just another professional on her way to a conference. But her heart pounded with a terrible clarity. Perhaps she wasn't just another passenger today. Perhaps fate had seated her in 22B for a reason. The retiree beside her scribbled furiously in the margins of his crossword, though the pencil trembled in his hand. The young woman across the aisle clutched her necklace, whispering into the beads like lifelines. The businessman no longer scrolled through spreadsheets. He sat frozen, staring at the seat back with hollow eyes. Time stretched unbearably. The captain's plea echoed in Emily's head. She felt the weight of every second passing, every mile hurtling beneath them. Every life on board balanced precariously in the thin air. Her fingers curled around the armrest. She inhaled deeply, then released it, trying to steady the storm. Inside, she thought of her first flight lesson, the instructor beside her saying, "Flying isn't about fearlessness. It's about controlling fear, guiding it into focus." Focus. That was what she needed now. Still, she hesitated. What if she failed? What if she froze at the controls? Hundreds of strangers, mothers, fathers, children would pay the price. But if she did nothing, the outcome might be worse. Her seat felt suddenly too small, the cabin too close. The walls seemed to press inward, squeezing the choice from her. In the aisles, the flight attendants moved urgently, scanning passengers, searching for salvation. Each step they took only heightened the realization that no one was coming forward. No one had the training. No one except perhaps Emily. She pressed her trembling hands together, closing her eyes for a brief, desperate moment. She saw her instructor's face again, calm, reassuring, reminding her that the sky, despite its vastness, obeyed rules. And rules could be learned, remembered, applied. When she opened her eyes, the world seemed sharper. The murmurs around her dulled into background noise. The flight attendant had stopped 2 rows ahead, scanning the cabin with quiet desperation. Emily's hand rose slowly, almost against her will. "I have some training," she heard herself say. Her voice was quiet, unsteady, but it carried in the hush of fear. Every head seemed to turn toward her at once. Eyes widened, whispers flared. The flight attendant pivoted sharply, rushing toward 22B. Relief flickered across her features, though it was tempered by urgency. "Come with me," she said. Emily swallowed hard, unbuckled her seatbelt, and stood. Her legs wobbled, but she steadied herself against the seat. The aisle stretched before her, a narrow path toward a future she could neither predict nor control. As she began walking, passengers watched in silence, their faces etched with fragile hope. The hum of the engines seemed louder now, the cabin air thinner. Every step forward deepened the truth. She had just volunteered for the impossible. And, as Emily neared the cockpit door, she knew the ordinary flight she had boarded that morning was gone forever. The cockpit door shut softly behind Emily, but the sound carried the weight of finality. For the passengers, the moment was surreal. They had watched her vanish beyond that threshold, as though into another world. For Emily, the reality hit like a sudden drop. There was no turning back now. The corridor outside the cockpit smelled of electronics and metal, warmer than the cabin. A flight attendant kept close, her hand hovering at Emily's elbow, as though ready to catch her should she stumble. Emily's legs felt unsteady, her breath shallow. Each step forward seemed to echo the pounding in her chest. When the cockpit door opened again, the sight inside stopped her cold. The co-pilot was slumped in his seat, his face pale, his headset hanging loosely around his neck. A paramedic wasn't coming. There was no paramedic at 35,000 feet. One of the attendants crouched beside him, trying in vain to rouse him with a wet cloth, and whispered please. His chest rose shallowly, but his eyes remained closed. Beside him, the captain turned sharply as Emily entered. His face, drawn tight with stress, carried years of experience, but was now lined with fear. Sweat glistened at his temples. His hands moved swiftly over the controls, adjusting knobs and scanning dials. But his focus was split half on the aircraft, half on the crisis. "You're the passenger?" His voice was clipped, urgent. Emily swallowed. "Yes, I trained years." "Go, small planes." The captain's eyes flickered, something between relief and grim calculation. "Better than nothing." He gestured to the empty co-pilot's seat. "Sit, quickly." Her legs carried her forward almost without permission. The chair felt enormous, wrapped in switches, lights, and displays far more complex than anything she had ever touched. She lowered herself slowly, her fingers gripping the armrests. The captain leaned closer, his voice low and steady despite the chaos in his eyes. My co-pilot collapsed shortly after takeoff. No response. "I need help. I can manage the basics, but landing this aircraft alone? It's not safe. I need another set of hands, another set of eyes. Do you understand?" Emily nodded shakily, though her mind screamed otherwise. This wasn't a training exercise. This wasn't a classroom at a small-town airstrip. This was hundreds of lives strung together in a steel capsule racing across the sky. Her gaze swept the panel in front of her. Rows of buttons blinked in rhythm. Gauges spun with unreadable precision, and the autopilot screen glowed with numbers she barely understood. It felt like staring into a foreign language she once studied, but had long since forgotten. I don't know if I can." The captain cut her off, his voice rising slightly, not in anger but necessity. "You don't have to know everything. Just listen, follow my instructions, one step at a time." Behind them, the attendant still tried to revive the co-pilot. The sight of his limp body hammered into Emily's mind. This was no simulation, no exaggeration. The second professional meant to guide this plane was gone, leaving a vacuum she was expected to fill. Her throat felt dry, words sticking. She forced herself to inhale deeply. She remembered her instructor's voice from years ago. "Breathe first. A panicked pilot is a dangerous one. Breathe and act." So she breathed, slowly. The captain adjusted controls, speaking quickly. "We're stable for now. Autopilot's on, altitude steady. But turbulence is building ahead, and we'll need to divert. I can't manage comms, navigation, and controls alone." He glanced at her. "You've handled a yoke before?" "Yes, in a Cessna. Small planes. Good. Principles are the same, just bigger." He allowed the faintest shadow of a grim smile, then his tone hardened. "Can I count on you?" The question felt heavier than any she had ever heard. Emily's stomach twisted. She thought of the passengers just beyond the door, the mother feeding crackers, the businessman on his laptop, the retiree with his crossword. Faces flashed in her mind, faces that didn't know their lives now hinged on the shaky resolve of the woman in seat 2D. What if she failed? Her hands trembled, but she forced them onto her lap. She straightened her shoulders, meeting the captain's eyes. "I'll do what I can." He nodded once, sharply, then pressed a headset into her hands. "Put this on." The headset crackled. As she slid it over her ears, a calm, professional voice immediately filled the channel. "Air traffic control? Flight 308, we copy. Status update?" The captain leaned toward the microphone. "Co-pilot incapacitated. Passenger assisting. Need step-by-step support for approach and landing." A brief silence followed, then the controller's voice, steady and measured. "Understood, Captain. We'll coordinate. Passenger whoever's assisting, you're doing the right thing. Just stay calm." Emily closed her eyes briefly, grounding herself in that reassurance. Then she opened them, staring again at the sprawling console in front of her. Beyond the glass, the sky stretched endlessly blue, calm, deceptive. Inside the cockpit, the reality was anything but calm. The unthinkable had happened. One pilot down, another overwhelmed, and a stranger now filling the most critical seat on the plane. She could almost hear the whispers of the passengers behind her, though the door remained sealed. They had placed their lives in unseen hands, trusting that anyone would step forward, and she had. Emily's heart pounded, but a strange clarity began to settle over her. She remembered her instructor once saying, "Flying is 90% preparation, 10% courage. When the preparation fails, you better hope the courage shows up." She had no preparation for this. All she had left was courage. The captain adjusted a dial, then nodded toward her. "We'll get through this together, one step at a time. Just don't freeze on me." Emily tightened her grip on the armrest, then shifted her hands closer to the controls. She was no longer a passenger. She was part of the cockpit, and for the first time, she truly grasped the enormity of it. The safety of every soul on that plane now rested, at least in part, on her. Emily sat rigid in the co-pilot's seat, headset pressing against her ears, the hum of instruments surrounding her like 1,000 murmuring voices. The cockpit was alive, blinking and glowing, every switch demanding knowledge she didn't have. Her pulse throbbed in her throat, and for a moment, she wondered if she could hear her own heartbeat through the static of the radio. The captain's hands moved with precision, his tone clipped but steady. "Autopilot's holding, but we're heading into weather. I can't manage navigation, communications, and a potential emergency descent alone." His eyes flicked too. "Her, if you're serious, I need you focused. If not, say it now." Emily's breath caught. Say it now. The invitation to back out was there, tempting, like a door cracked open behind her. She could walk away, return to the anonymity of seat 22B, and let fate unravel without her. She wanted that, every nerve in her screen to retreat. She wasn't a pilot, not really. But then she thought of the people on board, the child who had been giggling at cartoons, the retiree scribbling in his crossword, the mother doling out crackers, the businessman, the college students, the dozens of lives suspended in the air, faces that didn't know her name, but who had all looked up when she raised her hand. Her hands trembled in her lap. She clasped them tightly to hide it, but the captain noticed anyway. "I've flown with terrified co-pilots before," he said quietly, eyes still scanning instruments. "The difference between failure and survival isn't fear, it's what you do with it." He glanced at her. "Are you in or out?" Emily stared at the glowing displays, the vast sky beyond the windshield, 35,000 feet beneath them. Cities sprawled like grids of light. The distance between survival and disaster was just a thin layer of steel and a stranger's shaky courage. "I'm in," she whispered. The words startled her with their own certainty. The captain nodded, already adjusting his headset. "Good, then listen carefully." The radio crackled. "To life again. Flight 308. Ground control here. We understand a passenger is assisting. We'll guide you step by step. Stay calm. Stay calm." Easy words, impossible request. The captain handed her a laminated card from the side pocket. "Checklists. Start here. Read each line out loud." Her hands shook as she took it. She recognized the structure, the rhythm of cockpit drills. She had done this in her training years ago, but never like this. Still, the muscle memory stirred. She began reading. Autopilot engaged, throttle at set power. Fuel transfer. Normal. Her voice wavered, but with each line, steadied. The captain confirmed each step, his quick nods giving her a strange anchor. She was doing it. Not perfectly, not with confidence, but she was functioning. When she finished, she exhaled shakily, lowering the card. Her chest felt lighter, though her nerves remained raw. "Not bad," the captain muttered. He gave her a quick, assessing glance. "You said you've flown before?" "Years ago," Emily admitted. "Training flights. Cessna 172s. I never got my license." He chuckled grimly. "Well, today you're skipping the test and heading straight for the check ride of your life." The remark should have terrified her, but instead it jolted her with grim determination. This was no longer about her confidence. It was about necessity. Behind them, the attendant still tended to the unconscious co-pilot, checking his pulse, keeping him stable. Every so often, the captain would glance back, the tightness in his jaw betraying the weight of his burden. One man down, another uncertain. And yet, somehow, hope had slipped into the cockpit with Emily's presence. Still, doubt gnawed at her. She leaned closer to the captain, lowering her voice. "What if I mess up? What if I can't do this?" The captain didn't hesitate. "Then we'll both go down trying. But I'd rather try with 2 sets of hands than 1. The bluntness cut through her panic like cold water. There was no space for hypotheticals, only action. Emily forced herself to grip the yoke lightly, not to control, but to feel it. The cool metal was steady, alive with the subtle tremors of flight. Her mind flickered back to her instructor's words from years ago. "Trust the aircraft. It wants to fly. Don't fight it, guide it. Guide it." The captain began explaining systems in brisk, simple terms. "Ignore 90% of these buttons. Focus on what I tell you. Airspeed, heading, altitude. The rest leave to me." She nodded, clinging to his words like lifelines. Minutes passed in tense silence, broken only by clipped exchanges with ground control. The weather ahead grew darker, turbulence shaking the cabin lightly. Emily tightened her grip, knuckles whitening, but forced herself to breathe evenly. Passengers would be feeling it now, the first real hint that something was wrong. She pictured them bracing, whispering, waiting for answers. And she realized something. They thought she had them. To them, she wasn't a woman who had once quit. Flying lessons. She was the one who had stood up, the one who had walked into the cockpit. That responsibility both terrified and steadied her. Suddenly, the aircraft jolted. The turbulence wasn't gentle anymore. It tossed them sharply, knocking her against the armrest. The cockpit rattled, alarms flickering briefly before stabilizing. Emily gasped, but the captain barked, "Stay with me?" Her instinct was to let go, to freeze, but she forced her hands steady on the yoke, her breath ragged. The aircraft leveled again, the violent shake fading into a restless hum. The captain nodded once. "Good, you didn't let go." Emily swallowed hard. "I wanted to. Wanting to doesn't matter." "You didn't." It wasn't praise. Exactly, but it settled something inside her. Through the windshield, clouds loomed darker, their edges bruised with storm. The captain adjusted dials, speaking to ground control, his voice clipped but controlled. Emily listened, absorbing terms, anchoring herself in the rhythm of professional calm. In the back of her mind, she imagined the passengers gripping their armrests as the plane bounced, whispering prayers, their eyes darting toward the cockpit door. She knew they were waiting for reassurance, something the crew couldn't yet give. But soon, she would have to help deliver it, not with words, but with action. She closed her eyes briefly, centering herself. This wasn't about whether she felt ready. She wasn't. It was about whether she would act anyway. When she opened them again, her fear hadn't vanished, but it had transformed. It wasn't paralyzing anymore. It was fuel. The captain glanced at her again. "Still with me?" "Yes," she said, her voice steadier this time. "I'm with you." It was a reluctant decision, but a decision nonetheless. Emily Carter, The woman who had boarded the plane as a passenger in seat 22B had crossed the line. She was no longer just cargo carried from one city to another. She was crew, however untrained, however unwilling. A fate of Flight 308 now had her fingerprints on it, and though fear still coursed through her veins, she understood the truth. Stepping up didn't mean erasing fear, it meant carrying it anyway. For the first time since the announcement, Emily felt something that almost resembled resolve. Emily's world had shrunk to the cockpit. Behind the sealed door, passengers whispered and worried. But up here, there was no time for panic. Only dials, numbers, alarms, and the steady drone of the engines filling her headset. She sat rigid. In the co-pilot's chair, her back damp with sweat, her hands resting just above the yoke, as if it were an unfamiliar beast she might spook with the wrong touch. The captain leaned forward, his face set in grim concentration. His right hand adjusted throttle levers. His left flicked switches with practiced precision. Every movement was fluid, decisive, the work of a man who had spent decades taming skies. Yet Emily could see the strain etched into the corners of his eyes. Alone, even a veteran could not shoulder the storm ahead. "You need to breathe slower," he said without looking at her. His tone was calm, but carried command. "Your breathing's too fast. Oxygen's thinner up here. It'll get to you if you don't control it." Emily exhaled shakily, realizing her chest had been rising and falling in rapid bursts. She forced herself to slow down, dragging air into her lungs in steady intervals. "That's better," he said. He finally turned, meeting her gaze. "Listen carefully. I'm flying this plane. You're my second set of hands. Don't worry about the whole picture, focus on what I tell you." She nodded, though her nerves buzzed like static. The radio crackled. "Flight 308, you're at 35,000 feet, holding steady. We've cleared airspace for emergency approach into St. Louis. Repeat, you are cleared to divert to St. Louis." The captain pressed his transmitter. "Copy. Diverting to St. Louis." He gestured at Emily. "Repeat it back." She blinked. "What?" "Say it. Exactly. Repeat it." Standard cockpit protocol. 2 sets of ears confirm. Emily fumbled for the button, her finger trembling as she pressed it. Flight 308, diverting to St. Louis." Her voice cracked, awkward in the professional cadence of the radio, but the controller's reply came steady. "Roger, 308. We've got you." The captain gave her a short nod. "Good. That's your first job. Verify. Confirm. Repeat. Communication saves lives. No shame in nerves." Her cheeks burned, but a sliver of pride slipped through. She had spoken into the system connecting them to the world below. She had been heard. The cockpit lights blinked faintly as the aircraft dipped through a thin cloud bank, turbulence jostling them. Emily gripped the armrest. "Hands on the yoke," the captain ordered. Her heart stuttered. "Now? Now." She slid her hands onto the control column. The surface felt firm, yet strangely alive, vibrations transmitting from the wings through her palms. The captain kept his own hands on his controls, guiding in tandem. "Feel it?" he asked. She nodded mutely. "The plane's stable. Autopilot's keeping us level, but turbulence can knock it off balance. If it bucks, you respond, don't overcorrect." Gentle inputs. Emily swallowed hard, forcing herself not to grip too tightly. She remembered her first lesson years ago. The plane wants to fly. Don't wrestle it. Just guide it. As if testing her resolve, the aircraft shuddered violently, a sudden pocket of air dropping them 6 feet. The cabin jolted. She imagined gasps rippling through the passengers. The yoke trembled in her hands. Instinct screamed at her to jerk, to fight it, but she resisted, easing pressure instead. The nose leveled. "Good," the captain said sharply. "You let it ride. That's exactly what you do." Her pulse thundered, but she managed a breath of relief. For the first time, the yoke didn't feel alien. It felt manageable. Minutes dragged. Every second was filled with tasks, commands, numbers. The captain barked headings, altitudes, speeds. Emily read them aloud, her voice steadier each time. Her role was still basic, but vital. She was not merely a passenger anymore. She was his second set of eyes. At one point, ground control asked for fuel estimates. The captain shot her a look. "Gauge, bottom right. Read it." Emily scanned the panel, found the dials flickering in units she hadn't seen in years. 7,000 pounds, left tank. 7,000, right? Say it into the radio. Her hand shook slightly as she pressed the button. Flight 308, reporting fuel 7 left, 7 right. The response came instantly. Copy 308. You're good for approach. A faint warmth spread through her chest. She had done it correctly. Still, the enormity pressed on her. She glanced at the unconscious co-pilot slumped to her right. His presence was a silent reminder of what had been lost and what she was trying to replace. The captain noticed her glance. His voice softened. "Don't let him rattle you. You're here now. You're what I've got. And you're enough." The words lodged in her throat like a lifeline. She gripped the yoke tighter, steadier. Suddenly, alarms blared an angry beep, red lights flashing across the panel. Emily's stomach dropped. "What is that?" she gasped. "Autopilot disengaged," the captain barked, his hands snapping onto controls. "Turbulence knocked us off." He looked at her, fierce. "This is you now. Hands on. Keep it steady." Her body froze. "Emily, focus." The sound of her name jolted her. She forced her muscles into motion, pressing her hands firmly on the yoke. The aircraft wobbled, the horizon tilting. She gasped, instinct flaring to overcorrect. "Gentle." The captain snapped. "Small movements. Feel it. Don't fight it." She eased, nudged, breathed. The wings leveled, the nose steadied. The alarms silenced. Emily sat trembling, her heart pounding so loud, drowned the drone of engines. The captain's eyes locked on hers. "You just flew that correction. Do you understand what that means? You're flying this plane." She stared at him, disbelief clashing with terror and awe. "I didn't, you did," he cut her off. "And you'll keep doing it. Because these people back there need you to." The weight of his words sank deep. Emily looked out the cockpit window. The clouds parted briefly, revealing the curve of the world below patchwork fields. Highways, rivers gleaming like silver veins. All of it was impossibly far, impossibly fragile. And between it and the people inside the fuselage was her. For the first time, she let the thought settle fully. I am part of this flight crew now. Her fear hadn't vanished. It still roared in her chest. But it was no longer the enemy. It was fuel. The cockpit hummed with controls. The radio murmured instructions. The captain's hands moved with certainty. And Emily Carter, once just a woman in seat 22B, sat in the co-pilot's chair, learning in real time what it meant to carry lives in her hands. The storm ahead was growing, the hardest part yet to come. But she had crossed a line. There was no turning back. Inside the cockpit, Emily was no longer asking herself if she could do it. She was already doing it. The cockpit was alive with sound. The constant hum of the engines, the crackle of radio transmissions, the occasional ding of warnings that seemed to appear just to test her resolve. Emily sat in the co-pilot's chair, shoulders tight, hands firm on the yoke, her knuckles pale. For a moment, she thought she had found her rhythm. She was beginning to trust her touch on the controls, beginning to believe she could do this. That illusion shattered when the aircraft lurched suddenly to the left, as though some invisible hand had swatted the plane sideways. The passengers screamed behind the door. "Hold it steady," the captain barked. Her grip tightened. She fought, the instinct to wrench the yoke back. Her mind screamed, correct it now." But the captain's voice cut through. "Small movements, smooth. Don't let the turbulence push you around." She exhaled shakily, easing pressure into her left hand, nudging the plane back level. Her heart hammered, but the horizon steadied. "Good," the captain said, not looking at her. His eyes were locked on the instrument panel. His tone clipped. "Remember, the plane wants to fly. You just have to guide it." But the turbulence wasn't done. The jet pitched down abruptly, her stomach lurching as gravity seemed to vanish. Drinks in the cabin likely splashed into the air. She heard the muffled sound of luggage shifting overhead. Then, with a violent jolt, the plane snapped back upward, pressing her spine hard against the seat. Her breath caught in her throat. She felt her chest tighten, panic threatening to spiral out of control. "I can't do this. I can't." The captain's hand shot out, pressing firmly on her forearm without taking over. "Stay with me, Emily. Focus, one input at a time." She blinked rapidly, her vision blurring with tears she hadn't realized were forming. I'm going to mess this up. Not if you keep breathing," he said. His tone was forceful, grounding. "You panic, we lose. You stay calm, we win. Which do you want?" Her throat bobbed. She forced air into her lungs, long and deliberate, even as the plane rattled violently. I want to win. Then show me." The turbulence buffeted them again, but this time she adjusted with a gentle touch, steadying the nose. The captain gave a short nod, the faintest glimmer of approval flickering across his face. The radio crackled suddenly. "Flight 308. Radar shows you're entering a storm cell. Expect moderate to severe turbulence for the next 20 miles. Emily's pulse spiked. 20 miles. That meant 20 minutes of this hell. The captain answered calmly. "Copy, 20 miles of turbulence." He looked at her. "You're going to hold through this. Understand?" She wanted to scream, to demand why this had to fall on her shoulders. But deep inside, another voice whispered, "Because you're the one who raised her hand. You chose this." She nodded, lips pressed tight. Understood. The storm engulfed them. Rain hammered the fuselage with a metallic fury, the sound like pebbles against a tin roof. Lightning flashed outside the cockpit windows, illuminating Emily's face in ghostly bursts. The aircraft jolted again, instruments blinking warnings that seemed almost mocking. Her hands were trembling, but her grip on the yoke never faltered. Every bump, every drop, every sideways shove felt like a test designed specifically for her. Her body screamed with tension, shoulders burning from the effort, but she refused to let go. The captain continued issuing instructions. Heading 3-2-0. Ease left. Heading 320, she repeated, voice quivering but clear, nudging the yoke. Altitude 33,000. Keep her there. 33,000, she confirmed, her eyes glued to the altimeter. This back and forth became her anchor. Repeat, confirm, act. It was the rhythm of survival. But as the minutes dragged on, fatigue gnawed at her. Sweat rolled down her temple. Her arms ached. Every second felt like an eternity stretched across nerves frayed to the breaking point. Then, without warning, another violent downdraft slammed them downward. The nose pitched steeply, alarms blaring shrill warnings. Emily screamed, instinct jerking her hands back on the yoke, pulling too hard. The plane's nose rose sharply, stomachs flipping in the cabin. The captain's voice thundered, "Ease! You'll stall it." She froze, her mind blank with terror. The captain reached over, guiding her hands firmly, lowering the nose back into balance. The alarm silenced. The aircraft steadied. Emily's chest heaved, shame mixing with fear. You almost overcorrected. The captain interrupted firmly. And you caught it. That's the difference between someone who panics and someone who learns. Her wide eyes met his. He wasn't scolding her. He was teaching her, shaping her under fire. She swallowed, nodding. Her voice steadied as she whispered, I won't panic again. Good, he said simply. The turbulence continued, but something inside her shifted. Instead of seeing each jolt as a threat, she began to treat them as challenges, waves to ride, not walls to crash into. Each correction became smoother, more deliberate. The captain seemed to sense the change. That's it. Trust yourself. Trust the plane. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours, but slowly the storm began to thin. The violent shaking eased into softer tremors. The rain softened, lightning fading into the distance. Emily exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Her muscles quivered with exhaustion, but her hands were still firm. The radio came alive again. Flight 308. You're through the worst of it. Clear skies ahead in 10 miles. You're doing great up there. She blinked in disbelief. They said I'm doing great? The captain gave her a rare, tight smile. You are. Her heart lifted, a fragile spark of pride piercing through the haze of fear. The turbulence eased further, until at last the plane slid into calmer air. The cockpit grew quieter, the instruments steady once more. Emily let her hands fall briefly to her lap, shaking with fatigue. She couldn't believe she had survived that stretch. The captain glanced at her, his expression softer now. That was your test, Emily. You stayed in the fight. That's what matters. She looked out the window. The clouds were breaking apart, sunlight spilling across the horizon. Below, the patchwork of America stretched wide and infinite. For the first time, she felt a connection to all of it, not as a passenger watching from a seat, but as someone who had held the sky in her hands. She was exhausted, terrified, overwhelmed, but she was still here, still flying, and the runway was waiting. The radio crackled again, its static-laced voice filling the cockpit. Flight 308, you are clear for approach. Runway 27 in sight. Winds gusting at 10 knots. Crosswind from the north. Emily's throat tightened. She swallowed hard. Eyes flicking from the glowing instruments to the horizon ahead. Beyond the thinning clouds, a line of bright lights cut through the darkness. The runway. It stretched out like a lifeline in the void, both a promise and a test. Her palms were damp against the yoke. She adjusted her grip, willing or trembling. Fingers to steady. The captain's voice, calm but firm, broke through her spiraling thoughts. Emily, this is it. You've done the hard part. Now we bring her home. She nodded stiffly, forcing words past her dry lips. I see the runway. Good. Keep your eyes on it. That's where we're going. Nothing else matters right now. Behind the locked cockpit door, the passengers were silent. The earlier screams and murmurs had faded, leaving only the oppressive hush of hope and fear. 200 lives leaned into her every movement, even if they didn't know her name. She was still just a woman in seat 22B. But up here, she was the only thing standing between them and disaster. The captain adjusted a few switches, his movements precise, practiced, and strangely reassuring. Flaps to 15, he said. Her fingers hesitated over the controls, scanning the unfamiliar levers. He pointed quickly, and she moved them. Into position. The plane shuddered slightly as the flaps extended, creating more drag, more lift. Speed's coming down, he continued. We're going to ride her in slow. Keep the nose steady, The altimeter ticked down. 10,000 feet. 9,500. Her heart thudded with every drop. The radio buzzed again. Flight 308. Wind shear reported on final approach. Proceed with caution. Her chest tightened. Wind shear? What does that mean? It means, the captain said evenly, the air near the ground isn't playing nice. Sudden changes in wind speed or direction. We'll adjust. Stay focused. The thought of invisible forces battering the plane in its final moments made her stomach twist. But there was no time to dwell. The runway grew larger, its lights clearer, each white beam cutting a path through the night. All right, Emily, the captain said, his eyes locked on her. I'll call the numbers. You fly the plane? Understand? She nodded, jaw clenched. Understood. Good. Altitude, 8,000 feet. Pitch steady. Keep her nose just a hair above. Level. Her hands tightened on the yoke, adjusting minutely. The jet responded sluggishly, slower than the small training planes she once flew, but it responded nonetheless. Her breathing fell into rhythm with the descent. 7,000 feet. 6,500. Flaps 25, the captain ordered. She moved the lever. Another tremor rolled through the aircraft as the wings shifted. The plane's nose wobbled slightly, and panic flickered. Too much, too fast. Steady, the captain's voice cut in, sharp as a blade. Don't fight. Feel it. She eased her grip, coaxing the plane back in line. The runway was larger now, its details clearer. The white stripes, the edge lights glowing like a pathway in the dark. It was beautiful, terrifying. 5,000 feet. The passengers must have felt the descent now. In the cabin, seatbelts clinked as people tightened them. Someone whispered a prayer loud enough to carry through the silence. Emily's stomach clenched. She couldn't think of them. Couldn't think of anything but the lights ahead. The captain continued, his tone clipped, but steady, like a drumbeat keeping her anchored. Altitude 4,000. Airspeed 160. Keep it steady. You're on the glide path. The plane dipped slightly off course, and Emily gasped, overcorrecting with a sharp nudge to the right. The captain's hand shot out, steadying the yoke with her. Gentle. Always gentle. You're not wrestling her. You're guiding her. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She nodded, correcting her touch. The plane aligned once more with the glowing line of the runway. 3,000 feet. The ground was close enough now that she could make out the shapes of buildings, the faint scatter of headlights moving along roads near the airport. Life carried on down there, ordinary and oblivious. Up here, life hung in the balance. The radio barked again. Flight 308, you are cleared to land. Winds cross at 12 knots. Good luck. Good luck. The words weren't protocol, and they struck Emily harder than she expected. Even the controllers were holding their breath. 2,000 feet. The nose dipped again as a gust caught them, and Emily's pulse spiked. She corrected smoothly this time, nudging the yoke instead of jerking it. The captain gave a sharp nod. Better. Trust yourself. The lights of the runway blazed ahead now, filling her vision, growing larger by the second. 1,500 feet. The crosswind tugged at them again, pushing them off center. Emily bit down on her fear and countered gently, guiding the nose back toward the middle of the strip. Good, the captain murmured. Keep that line. Don't let it drift. Her breath came in short, controlled bursts. Sweat dripped from her forehead, stinging her eyes, but she didn't blink. 1,000 feet. The alarms chimed. Minimums. Her heart stuttered. Ignore it, the captain said quickly. That's for trained pilots. You and we go by sight now. Keep the lights dead ahead. 800 feet. The runway was a rushing beacon now, drawing them in, 600 feet. The captain's voice sharpened. Final stage, flaps full. Her trembling hand pulled the lever. The wings shifted. The aircraft slowed, nose lifting slightly. 400 feet. The ground loomed, rushing closer. Emily's entire body screamed with tension. Every nerve felt stretched to breaking. The captain leaned closer, voice low and urgent. "This is it, Emily. Hold her steady. Keep your eyes on the center line. Don't think about anything else." 300 feet. The crosswind shoved them sideways again, harder this time. The runway tilted in her vision. Emily's chest clenched. "We're going to miss it. We're going to..." "Correct." The captain barked. Her hands moved instinctively. Yoke tilted, rudder adjusted. The plane straightened, nose snapping back toward the glowing path. 200 feet. The runway lights blazed like stars beneath them. Emily's pulse thundered in her ears, her breath ragged. 100 feet. The captain's voice dropped to a whisper, almost reverent. "Now, Emily, bring us home." Her grip tightened. The ground rushed up. The jet roared forward, her hands steady despite the terror surging in her chest. The wheels reached for the earth. And Emily, the woman from seat 22B, braced herself to finish what she started. The landing gear screamed beneath them as the runway rushed up to meet the jet. Emily gripped the yoke, breath ragged but hands steady, every nerve in her body alive with tension. "Ease back," the captain's voice urged, low and commanding. "Just a little more, now." The nose lifted fractionally. A heartbeat later, the wheels slammed onto the tarmac with a bone-shaking thud. The plane bounced once, jolting every soul on board. A collective gasp burst from the cabin. Emily's heart lurched into her throat. But then, the wheels caught again. Solid contact. The aircraft roared against the runway, tires squealing under the weight of 200 tons of metal, momentum, and human lives. "You've got it," the captain barked. "Keep her straight. Rudder, yes, that's it." Emily wrestled the yoke, keeping the nose aligned with the glowing centerline that blurred beneath them. The plane fought her, skidding slightly as the crosswind shoved from the side, but she correcting again, coaxing it to obey. Brakes engaged, reverse thrusters thundered. The cabin shook with the violence of deceleration. In those moments, time fractured, seconds stretched into eternities. The end of the runway loomed closer. And then, finally, the speed bled away. The plane slowed, rolling, until it eased into a crawl. Silence fell. For a beat, no one dared breathe. The engines whined in protest, but the jet was safe. It was down. And then the cabin erupted. Cheers, sobs, applause. An explosion of raw human relief. Strangers hugged, cried into each other's shoulders, clutched trembling hands. The sound poured through the cockpit door, a tidal wave of gratitude and disbelief. Emily sat frozen, chest heaving, her fingers still locked to the yoke, as if afraid the plane might take off again if she let go. Her body trembled violently, the adrenaline flooding out all at once. "You did it," the captain said softly beside her. His hand, warm and steady, rested on her arm. His eyes, lined with exhaustion and awe, searched hers. "Emily, you saved us." Her lips parted, but no words came. All she could manage was a shaky laugh, half a sob. I didn't. You did." His voice left no room for doubt. "Don't ever forget that." The door creaked open, and a flight attendant slipped in, eyes wet with tears. She looked at Emily as though she were something otherworldly. "They're asking for you," she whispered. Emily blinked. "Me?" The attendant nodded. "The passengers, they know." Emily's chest tightened. Her legs felt like lead, as she rose from the seat, the world swaying around her. She followed the attendant back through the narrow aisle, every step echoing louder in her head than the roar of the engines had moments ago. When she emerged into the cabin, the sight stopped her cold. 200 faces turned toward her. 200 sets of eyes filled with gratitude, awe, and something she couldn't name. The applause swelled again, deafening now, like a crashing wave. Some people stood, clapping until their palms were red. Others wept openly, mouthing words she couldn't hear but could feel. Thank you. Thank you. A child pressed her face to the seat back, wide-eyed, whispering to her mother. That's her. Emily's throat closed. She gripped the nearest headrest for balance, overwhelmed. Her voice cracked. She shook her head, tears spilling unchecked. I was just in seat 22B. Laughter bubbled from the crowd, warm and astonished. Someone called out, Not anymore. The applause redoubled. She sank into a nearby seat, burying her face in her hands, and for the first time since the nightmare began, she allowed herself to cry. Not from fear, but from the sheer, shattering release of it all. Minutes later, paramedics rushed on board for the co-pilot. The passengers were ushered off slowly, carefully, still murmuring Emily's name as they passed her. Some touched her shoulder, others whispered blessings. A few simply smiled through tears. By the time she stepped off the jet herself, the night air hit her like a baptism cool, grounding, alive. Emergency lights flashed across the tarmac. Airport staff, fire crews, even security stood watching as she descended the steps. And then, as if on cue, another ripple of applause broke out. This time, it wasn't just the passengers. It was everyone, crews, medics, strangers on the ground, who'd only just learned what had happened. Emily's knees nearly buckled. She wanted to disappear, to shrink back into the anonymity of seat 22B. But anonymity was gone. A reporter's microphone appeared. A camera flashed. Questions blurred together. How did you do it? Were you scared? What's your name? She shook her head, shielding her face. She wasn't a hero, not in her own mind. She was just a woman who'd taken flight lessons years ago and never imagined they'd matter. But as she looked back at the hulking silhouette of the plane, the lives still walking off it, alive, safe, she felt something shift inside her. Later, in the quiet of a small airport lounge, the captain found her again. His uniform was rumpled, his eyes weary, but his presence was solid. He sat beside her, resting heavily in the chair. You handled that better than some trained pilots I've known, he said simply. Emily laughed weakly. I thought I was going to kill us all. You didn't. You listened. You trusted yourself. That's more than most people would have done. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. You have a gift. Don't let it go to waste. She stared at him, unsure how to respond. A gift? No. She was an ordinary woman, with an ordinary life waiting beyond the airport. Yet, something deep inside her stirred. A spark she'd buried long ago, when she gave up on her dream of flying. Maybe, she thought, seat 22B had reminded her of who she really was. When the sun rose the next morning, the story had already spread. Headlines screamed across the country. Passenger lands plane after pilot collapse. News anchors replayed shaky. Cell phone videos of passengers cheering, of Emily stepping into the aisle, pale and trembling but alive. Her phone buzzed endlessly. Calls from friends, family, people she hadn't spoken to in years. Strangers sent messages online, calling her brave, incredible, a hero. She didn't feel like any of those things. She felt small, fragile, still reeling from the night. But beneath it all was something else too. A quiet pride. For the rest of her life, Emily knew people would remember her, not just as the woman from seat 22B, but as the one who stood up when the impossible question was asked. Is anyone trained to fly? And though she never sought the spotlight, though she never claimed the title herself, the world had already decided. Emily, the quiet woman in seat 22B, was a hero.